Are you afraid of snakes? If you are, you're not alone. A recent Gallup poll indicates that 51% of Americans have a fear of snakes. When you throw venom into the mix, I am sure that fear percentage increases significantly. Have you ever wondered how many different species of venomous snake occur on military lands? What the most common species are? Or perhaps the most dangerous? Have you ever considered the impact venomous snakes have on the military mission? Or the work that DoDPARC does to enhance that mission while conserving species? If you're interested in all this stuff, then this is the episode for you. Bring your snake boots. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the DoDPARC podcast. I'm Trefry, your host. I just wanted to pause real quick to identify our speakers for this episode. We have Chris Petersen, the National Rep, and we have Rob Lovich, the National Tech Rep at DoDPARC. Myself, we were fortunate enough to get together over the winter to record a bunch of material for upcoming episodes, including this one on venomous snakes on DoD Lands. I promise you it's not as dramatic as that intro. I was just having a little bit of fun there while I try and figure all this out. Also, stay tuned past the outro because we have a bonus interview with a really cool guy. Most of you probably know him and love him like I do. And lastly, I guess I just say I hope you're all well and healthy and staying sane during this time of pandemic. It's a strange time, and we're all just doing the best we can. So I, for one, hope it's over soon because I really miss all you beautiful faces. So, all right, enough of that. Let's jump into the episode, Venomous Snakes on DoD Lands. All right, so we're going to talk about venomous snakes on DoD Lands. Chris is going to cover the basic biological stuff. Just jump right in because he's definitely prepared with facts.
I did my homework.
Here, he did his homework. So how many venomous species are on military lands? Chris, I'm just going to let you jump right into the facts.
All right. So in regards to your first question, how many venomous species are on CONUS DoD lands? If you adhere to all the taxonomy changes recently, the number is 29, and that would be 28 snake species and 1 lizard species, the Gila monster. And of those 28 snake species, that also includes the yellow-bellied sea snake, which occasionally washes up on military lands in California. Mm-hmm. So 29 is the official number right now, but you know, that's if you adhere to all the latest taxonomy, like 2 species of copperheads, 2 species of cottonmouths.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, but that includes every venomous species in the United States.
Wow.
So every venomous species in the United States are found on military lands, at least one.
That's great. That's
yeah.
That's something I didn't know. Being from New England, I have no experience with venom, like none. So it's extremely interesting to me.
So in regards to what the most common species is, by far it's the copperhead snake. And it's just because that species is so widely distributed across the eastern and central U.S. Very common snake in residential areas and wooded areas, and they do really well in close proximity to people.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
The cottonmouth is a close second.
Now, those are the only 2 venomous species I've ever had my hands on, is the cottonmouth and the copperhead, and that was last year when we were in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. So I've seen a dead timber rattlesnake, and apparently there's some up by us, but I've never seen them in New Hampshire and Maine.
That's
you were in Pennsylvania. We got the one in.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Do have a timber
yeah,
rattler.
I do have a timber, so I'm up to 3. Thanks, Rob.
Knocks the belt. Yeah, man.
I was just talking about species lists with a friend of mine he's like a fanatic of his annual species and then his life species.
Yeah.
And he's like, where's your list? And I'm like, I don't keep lists.
No.
Yeah.
I don't. It's all, I
Most
lock it up in
herpers
the
don't.
memory.
That's a birding thing.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
he's a serious birder. Like he's a serious birder. And he's like, I got to get that bird today because it's on, whatever that avian thing is. But
And if you find someone who has a herp list, they're really a birder that happens to also have a herp list. That's been my experience.
yeah, I found that funny. So as far as distribution goes, one end of the country to the other, right?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, in regards to how those species are distributed, those 29 venomous species are distributed on around 200 military sites across the country. And Fort Huachuca in southern Arizona and the Barry M. Goldwater East Range, also, they have 7 species of venomous snake. So they have the highest biodiversity of venomous snakes. And then if you go
And the lizard. They also have the Gila monster. Yeah.
That's right. And then Fort Benning and Fort Stewart on the East Coast and Camp Lejeune each have 6 venomous species of snakes. So that's pretty cool.
6.
Yeah.
That's a lot of venom to manage.
Yeah.
So I would assume that the copperhead is probably the most dangerous, not because of its toxicity and venom, but just because of the frequency of occurrence.
Yes, I would say that's true. It's very rare to die in the U.S. from a venomous snake bite. In fact, more people die from cows every year in the United States.
Yep.
Eating cows or just being next to cows?
I think just being next to the cows, being kicked or trampled.
Both.
Yeah, both. Little heart disease. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we just have such good facilities, good hospitals, good anti-venom that it's just extremely rare to die from a venomous snake bite.
I
in the
did my
US.
research on that, and there's been 2 in the country since we've kept records of a military member dying from a venomous snake bite.
Wow.
Wow.
That's great.
One was
Timber.
he
Back
was
at George Washington.
it was actually a copperhead.
Okay.
The guy who was on duty, and he was bit, but he had health issues to begin with. So typically it wouldn't lead to death. And the other military member that was bitten off duty, and apparently he died too. And that I think was a timber rattlesnake. But as far as if you have health problems and you're not a physically fit person, that it's way more dangerous.
Yeah.
So
And there's never been a mortality from a Gila monster recorded. I think there was one record in the 1800s where a cowboy was bitten at a bar. He was playing with it and he died, but all the evidence seems to indicate that he was going to die anyway. He was in ill health, and whatever the circumstances of that one. But otherwise, nobody has ever died from a Gila monster. So
yeah.
just for the record.
Yeah. So, Chris, you have a lot of experience with rattlesnakes. I mean, it seems like that was your trajectory from the beginning was rattlesnakes, right? You've got a lot of hands-on experience with
And copperheads.
and copperheads, but everything that I like read up or read or talk to you about, it seems to be a lot related to the timber rattler.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you're right. I have experience with timber rattlesnakes and copperheads. I actually worked on copperheads for my master's thesis and looked at their movement patterns and habitat use and radio telemetred some animals and followed them around. But during that time, the Navy got a contract, Old Dominion University got a contract from the Navy to study timber rattlesnakes on their land because they had recently been listed as state endangered in Virginia. And so the professor who I was working for, Dr. Savitsky, hired me on as a technician, and we started radio tracking timber rattlesnakes, and that blossomed into a 7-year full-time project for me, and then I carried on part-time after that for another 8 years. So it was a significant part of my life, radio tracking timber rattlesnakes.
That's exciting. And I know you really well, Robin. I have no idea if you have any venomous snake experience other than just survey work.
Primarily survey work, but all over the world.
Yeah.
Everywhere I've gone and done inventories, I've pretty much encountered venomous snakes from Malaysia to Central America, and throughout the United States. So yeah, I haven't. My resume reads a little bit light on venomous snakes and snakes in general. I've done plenty of inventory work, but not as much on focused work, but I've still encountered them an awful lot. And where I live in the Southwest is a venom-rich environment.
Yeah, it
the
is.
highest diversity of rattlesnakes in North America. And so, I can hardly throw a rock out there without hitting a venomous snake of some species. Yeah.
And I have zero experience, like I said before. I can walk through the woods with no shoes on, and
Yeah.
I have no fear of it. So,
Yeah.
what's your favorite? Just out of curiosity, what's your favorite snake?
It's without a doubt the timber rattlesnake.
Yeah, and why is that?
Just
Experience with it?
Just the amount of time that I've spent in the field observing them, I just have such a connection with that species, I could hardly explain it. It's just, I have a feeling so deep about what they go through on a daily and a yearly basis, because I've literally followed individuals over years and years.
You've lived it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say timber's probably mine too, but it's because I think it's the prettiest. I really do think it's the prettiest rattlesnake. How about you?
The next one I find.
Ah, classy, classy.
I love them all. They're great.
Yeah,
I had a lot of fun with Trimerosaurus in Malaysia. It's a really neat snake, and some of these venomous snakes have what's called cranial kinesis, where they can articulate their jaws
Yep.
in a way that they can almost flip their fangs upside down, it seems, when you catch them. And the Trimerosaurus that I caught over there definitely had some cranial kinesis going on, whereby I handled it and caught it in a secure fashion like I would any venomous snake, just behind the jaws and with the finger on top of the head. And that thing was totally trying to bite me with its fangs, and that was just amazing to watch. It was terrifying, but it was amazing to see that they had evolved that capacity to avoid predation. And it's a beautiful, incredible green snake. You're in the jungles of Malaysia.
why don't you go ahead with that?
Okay. So what is DoDPARC doing in regards to venomous snakes? And a lot of what we do is just pure education. So
Yep.
we developed a venomous snake poster, which has a nice picture of every venomous snake found on DoD lands, and then specifically lists those installations that those species are confirmed. We've developed 2 videos, which are both on YouTube, that deal with venomous snake and snake safety. The first goes over protocols for how to handle snakes using tongs and hooks, and a combination of tongs and hooks. And the second video describes the venomous snakes in the U.S., where they're found, how common are they, and then goes over characteristics of venomous versus non-venomous snakes. And that was produced last year, and that's also on YouTube. We've produced fact sheets on specific venomous snake species, just a 1-page fact sheet to educate military personnel and civilian personnel about the species there. We've also supported the Armed Forces Pest Management Board by devising snake guides to areas like Niger, Africa. And then lastly, which we're really psyched about, and we're going to be handing out at NAVFAC in 2020, we developed what we're calling snake ID cards, which there's a 1 card that describes the characteristics and length and pattern, and has pictures for the 12 most common venomous snakes on DoD lands. And they're all bound together by a nice key ring, and they're on waterproof paper, and I think they're going to be a real big hit.
Good. I wanted to just step back and explain the acronym NAVFAC, right? National Military Fish and Wildlife Association.
Chris, that's a great rundown. I think we had a standalone module for venomous snakes with our series for the training online also. We did it for ECATS, and I can't remember the name of of that acronym. We can come up with that, but
I don't think we did one specific on
no?
venomous snakes. No.
Okay, because we had 7, right? We didn't do one for venomous?
The 7th one was the first video, the snake safety video.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Clarity. All right.
Yep.
So we've got educational materials. We have stuff that people can pull straight from our website.
Yep. All the materials are on our website. So a lot of the questions that we get are, how do I keep snakes away from my house? Or how do I keep snakes away from our military cantonment areas or housing areas? And so we also developed a fact sheet on that. And it basically just goes over things that you can do to help take away habitat for those species and then take away food that they're attracted to. So it involves things like, keeping the grass cut short, keeping the bushes around the buildings trimmed up, not having a lot of ground cover plants as ornamentals like ivy. So, avoiding creating habitat for these animals or hiding places for them. And then also, another thing that is really common is taking away areas that attract food, like a board laying on the ground will attract mice to nest under. Wood piles, rock walls, things like that attract mice, rodents, which in turn attract snakes. So, yeah, it's a twofold approach for keeping snakes away from people's houses. But nothing is completely, foolproof. So there's always the chance of a snake being present.
Wherever there's human habitation, there are rodents.
Yep.
And wherever there are rodents, there are things that eat rodents.
And anything that is covered, because their diet changes over the life of a venomous snake. And so when they're juveniles, they may take invertebrates, lizards, smaller prey items. And so any sort of cover is home for those things, not just big fuzzy mice, but whatever can live under a board, and that could be an attraction for venomous and other snakes. So
what I always have trouble selling when it comes to this stuff is why is it important that we look so in depth on not just venomous snakes but just species in general? Like, why is it important what we're doing, especially when it comes to venomous snakes? I have a feeling Chris has got a canned answer ready to go right now, just based the look on his face. But why is it important that we put a lot of emphasis on knowing what we have, where they are, and what I'm getting at is the impact to the mission?
Well, I mean, the question could be answered in a multiple of ways. And first, there's a human health and safety issue with venomous snakes. But a lot of species, not just the venomous ones, but other reptiles and amphibians, are federally or state listed as threatened or endangered. So there's an obligation there. And also, you can't manage land if you don't know what's there. And so having an inventory and knowing exactly what species are there gives a natural resource manager a heads up and an advantage, because they can more efficiently and effectively manage those lands knowing what particular species are there. So DoDPARC is doing great things by doing inventories and surveys and identifying what species are on what military installations, reporting that information back to the installations who are incorporating those data into their NRAMs, which are helping to manage the lands in support of military readiness. So we're, in essence, helping to contribute to healthy, realistic, resilient training environments.
And we're doing that in perpetuity. And because of the duration that we do it, sometimes that's a long time, is what I'm trying to say. You can manage in opposition for particular species. Habitats change over time. Trees grow. Wetlands can fill in, etc. And so understanding what's there, you don't, and we've had direct situations where we have to go in and manipulate the environment to hold things back from growing too much because it's getting rid of particular species.
Do either of you get calls like about someone from an installation calling about the presence of venomous snakes, like that you've had to respond to?
Yes.
Like, what's the number one question they ask? Can I get rid of it? Can I kill it?
There's a saying, you don't need to manage wildlife, you need to manage people. And that's fair in the vein of the question you're asking. My experience most recently is at Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake, when sidewinders were showing up in people's driveways, and they have the housing area is basically a peninsula into the Mojave Desert, surrounded by 500,000 acres of the air station that is open Mojave Desert. And so you have a number of species that reside there, the coyotes, the various rattlesnakes, etc. And so when the people who live there find these, my first question is, let me see a picture, because a lot of times people will misidentify. And people who are fearful or don't know about snakes consider every snake venomous. So whenever you get a call, it's a snake. That's the one thing you can confirm. It's a snake, but you don't know if it's venomous. So you try and track it down to what type of snake, In this particular situation, it really was a sidewinder. The CO was very worried about that. He was concerned that wildlife was coming into the housing areas, especially venomous snakes with kids and everybody there. And so they kind of overreacted because of the direct impact that could have on human health and safety, and they wanted to build a wall around the neighborhood to exclude wildlife. Then I get the call, I show up on deck, I work with the XO and the second in command and the installation environmental head for the environmental department, and tried to assess all of the information available and have a response that meets the challenge, not an overreaction, such that if you built a wall, it's probably not going to be impervious to wildlife. You're still going to have things come in. The cost could be more than what it's worth, is what I'm saying. And I think educating people as to what the danger is, some of the things Chris rolled through earlier as far as removing habitat, educating them as to what types of snakes, how to avoid them, how to keep them away from your house, putting up kiosks, handing out flyers, having open house events. We did all of that for the situation at China Lake and avoided building a large, expensive wall that surrounded an entire neighborhood and kept people insulated from the natural environment. We frequently get calls from the game wardens, etc., on various installations as far as moving snakes, how far to move them, what do we do, or buying equipment, the right equipment, the handling. So they come in various types, the calls that we get on venomous snakes, but they can be rather big. That is a CO dialing you up and saying, hey, get rid of this pest, if you will, or this danger threat to the not only the troops, but also the families thereof.
What is like, is there a standard distance to move a snake? Should you move it?
It varies.
Situation,
Historically, the literature has said you can't really move them because they will perish, and data has shown that. Some of the early studies with venomous snakes, that's a species that dens communally, and so if you move it, that removes it from its known habitat, and it'll expend a lot of energy trying to find the resources it had there or to try and get back to that particular habitat, and thereby die by exhausting its resources trying to get back and find the resources it had where it was moved from. There's some literature and some studies coming in now in the West where you have rattlesnakes, but you don't have denning because it's so warm. They don't den communally during the winter, and you can move them extraordinary distances, miles in some cases, and they do just fine. So it really, every situation with snakes, with reptiles and amphibians really begs a local specific response. It's not well tailored to an overall response for all species in all parts of the country or the world.
That's really important for people to hear and understand that it's really situation specific.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, like what Rob was saying on the East Coast here, timber rattlesnakes have been shown not to do well if you move them more 3 or 4 miles away from where you initially capture them, because they just expend all that energy trying to get back to where they were from. But the situation is different for other species, so it's a case by case basis almost.
Yeah. Now, do you have any interesting stories, calls, or events?
I do get a lot of calls, a lot of pictures from coworkers and whatnot. Tell me what snake this is.
Yeah.
I saw it, in my house over the weekend. The calls that I get, and I agree with Rob that I would say a good 50% of them, they're misidentified as being a venomous snake, and so you can handle it right there. But there are a good number of cases where, it truly is a venomous snake, and I would go out and, remove that animal and then, release it to into an area where it's going to be safe and not bother anybody. But yeah, there's been some good fun calls, and you always have a crowd of people when you show up.
Yeah.
And you're always, you are always being recorded, and people got their cell phones out and they're having fun. But it's also a good opportunity while you're there to educate folks.
Absolutely.
It's important to say that when you move venomous snakes of virtually any species, studies are confirming one after another that the potential for you to find them in that location again is very low. that they find that as a threat, where maybe they saw that as a possible predation event when you pick it up and move it, just like a coyote grabbing it, a person grabbing it, or a hawk or whatever. If you move it, they avoid that situation.
There's a negative association.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And once you move it, you could move it a very short distance, and there's a very high chance that you will never see that snake again, just over your property line or whatever, if you a couple 100 feet away, 100 yards, which is interesting, that they're that smart.
Yeah, and based on all the radio telemetry studies that have gone on with numerous snake species, snakes know their habitats, they know their activity ranges really well. They know where to go to find food, find a mate, good shedding, digesting locations. They are very smart and know how to even navigate back to hibernation sites, either a rock crevice or a stump hole, after moving miles for the entire summer, and maybe even being several miles away at the point where they need to return. So they're really amazing in the way that most people think that snakes are nomadic wanderers or just moving around the environment randomly, but they're not. They have these set activity ranges that they use year after year after year, and they're really good at knowing where they are. So, that adds a lot of credibility to what we're talking about here. Is like, if they've gone through a negative response at a particular location, they're smart enough to avoid it in the future.
Yeah.
The one thing my son was asking me last week is, I was telling him I was coming down here, was when bitten by a venomous snake, do they always inject venom?
No.
That's what I told him.
Some people might argue that. I've heard some of my colleagues, expert herpetologists, say that there's no such thing as a dry bite, though, because there could be crystallized venom on the fang.
Yep.
That thereby goes into your blood system, and it could be a minute amount. It could be something that you don't feel anything from. The doctor may not pick it up if you got bit and you went to the doctor and all your vitals check out as the same, maybe a little higher heart rate after getting bit by it, but otherwise you're as healthy as you were. But then it can show up later and cause detrimental health issues because that small amount of venom was injected. You could have it runs the entire gamut of injecting a lot of venom to injecting none, but getting some residual venom in, even though they can meter the amount of venom that they inject in anything that they're trying to bite. And there's predatory bites, whereby they're trying to eat, and then there's defensive bites.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those are two very different bites, and there's been entire laboratories run around trying to determine the distinction between the two among snake species, at universities, that is.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind that the venom is a precious commodity for a venomous snake, because it energetically it costs quite a bit to make, and then it's reliant upon it to eat. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't want to. In most cases, it doesn't want to waste it.
Yeah, there's a physiological cost to producing more venom, and so after a bite, typically they will their activity will be less while they produce more venom, so that they have what they need in order to survive if they have to use it to eat and prey upon something. But there is definitely an energetic cost to producing more venom, and the snakes understand that after a strike, after a bite.
Yeah. How about a juvenile versus an adult?
The old myth.
Yeah, that's a myth. That's what I'm getting at here.
Yeah. I did read something that said it has more to do with the snake's ability to control injection.
Yeah.
But just adults are larger snakes with more quantity of venom.
Yep.
So I mean, they're more dangerous than a juvenile.
Every bite is unique. Every strike, every envenomation is unique. The number of variables is astronomical. The size of the snake, the type of the snake, the age of the snake, the age of the person, the health of the person, the situational context. All of those things bear upon what the outcome is going to be, or what it was. And so, going back to the question on juvenile versus adult snakes, they can still meter their venom as juveniles. They also, it's important to note for the audience that the venom of snakes changes over the life of an individual snake, and it changes across the range of a species of snake. So they're eating different things at different points in their life because of their gape size, the size of the prey that they can eat. Like I mentioned prior, that they may be eating invertebrates and lizards when they're young. They may be taking rabbits when they're 6 feet long, a red diamond rattlesnake. Those are really different prey items from being a juvenile to being an adult, and their venom changes in that manner. Mojave green rattlesnakes have a large range from northern Mexico, northwestern Mexico, into the southwestern United States, and their venom is very different across that range because they're eating different things in the Mojave Desert than they are in the Chihuahuan and the southern Sonoran Desert. There are different species of mammals, different species of lizards. Those species react differently as prey items to their venom, and so that venom is different across the life of an individual snake and across the range of a rattlesnake or any other venomous snake. And that's important information that a doctor, an expert, a herpetologist might be aware of. But for the treatment of those bites and understanding how those snakes operate, that's important information.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking and listening to this, we really should have invited Paul Block, because I think he's the only person I know who's been bitten by a venomous snake.
Yeah,
That's true. He's got
You know,
the scar on
maybe
his hand
we can bring him in
prove it.
tomorrow.
Maybe we should bring him in just so
Yeah.
he can recount his experience. I think that'd be interesting. It brings us to another good discussion point is, what are, I think a lot of natural resource managers would already be prepared, but what are some things in venomous snake country that when you're out doing field work, whether it's for snakes or something else, you should have with you on your person wearing, or just to protect yourself? PPEs.
Loincloth.
Yeah.
Good foot protection is always a great start. Having boots preferably. When I'm out in the field in rattlesnake country, I'll wear knee-high rubber boots, and I feel really safe in those. But having good foot protection, staying on trails, not walking off in brush where you really can't see where you're are is always a good thing. But the best and the most critical thing that you need while out in the field, if you do get bit, are your car keys. The best thing to do is notify someone that you've been bit, and then either get yourself to the hospital no matter any way possible, because that's the best thing you can do for a positive outcome from a snake bite.
Stay calm is what I hear.
Stay
too.
calm.
You don't want your blood rolling. That's got to be a hard thing to do.
Yes, and you don't want to drink alcohol. You don't want to cut yourself or cut the wound
You don't
open.
want to try and suck the venom out.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
All those things that people did, and snake kits were sold, and people made a lot
Tourniquets.
of money
Yeah.
on those
Yep.
snake kits that basically did nothing but jeopardize you further.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Most people were cutting themselves and causing more tissue damage than the snake bite did.
And probably allowing the venom to circulate through those tissues that
Exactly.
are now exposed
Yep.
to the venom, where they were isolated just in those the holes from the fang.
Yep.
Yep. You just want to get yourself to a hospital as quickly as you can so they can monitor you, see, if it was a dry bite or not, see if there's any swelling, and then in the most severe cases, administer antivenom.
And as far as gear, I kind of look at it in two genres, because we are biologists and we do a lot of work in the field. There's that group of folks, and then there's the naive folks who just want to go out and have a woodland experience or hike or camp. And everything that Chris said, but don't put your fingers and your hands in areas that you can't see first, crevices or holes, that even if you're rock climbing or just scrambling over a boulder, make sure of where you're putting your feet and your hands and your limbs, where there could be a rattlesnake somewhere in a crevice or around those rocks. Yeah,
Walk around that log. Don't step over it.
exactly. And among biologists, I'm one of those guys. I'm not a big fan of chaps or anything like that. I remember talking to Harry Green once, saying what I'm saying now, that I'm not a big fan. He said, well, when I'm in eastern diamondback country in some tall grass pine forest, I don't really want an 8-foot eastern diamondback sneaking up on me in the grass, because you could stumble upon one and not see it, and they're a very large snake, and they have a very long strike distance because of their size. And so I thought that was a good reminder that there are situational instances. If you can't see well and there's a high potential for a venomous snake, that having chaps and the boots, like Chris said, could very well save your life. And also, we had a contractor at Camp Pendleton once who was doing vernal pool vegetation surveys, and those are very small flowers. She was literally on her hands and knees looking and identifying plants, and she was struck on her leg, and she was so focused on the small plants, she didn't see the large snake that she was right next to. And fortunately, she was one of our contractors, a biologist, and she was okay. But she did get envenomated, and it was the real deal. So we were very worried for her. But you have to be aware. Every situation is unique, but as long as you're prepared and you think about it and you're aware of your surroundings, the chance of a bite is very low. Like we said, a cow might sneak up and kill her before that snake.
Yeah, lightning strike.
Exactly.
What else do we need to talk about?
Chris, I think it's important for the audience. We've talked about a lot of things, kind of Venomous Snake 101 and an update on the biodiversity and the biology across the DoD landscape. But DoDPARC has been reached out to in a very specific fashion by the military services to help improve their program medically and scientifically for the treatment of snake bites, so that they have it, if you will, the protocols racked and stacked, if you will, on what happens to our troops if they are bitten in a war theater or overseas or in a training event, and maybe mention to the audience some of the things that we've worked with from the pest management.
Sure. Yeah. So we've done so much in regards to that topic, and the first thing that comes to mind are site-specific surveys. Sometimes on our overseas installations, they just don't know what venomous snakes are there. So, for example, Rob and I did some surveys in Chemi, Italy, to discover that indeed there was a venomous snake there, the asp viper. Yep. And so we took that opportunity to not only find the snake, but then bring one back to educate the military personnel there. In addition, just recently I was in Kenya, Africa, doing surveys for endangered species, and I took that opportunity to work with the military personnel there to show them, there are venomous snakes here. They're really, really seriously venomous snakes.
What were they?
They've confirmed spitting cobras there, black mambas, green mambas, just a whole host of really, really highly venomous snakes.
That definitely kill people.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And the one snake that we did find when we were there was a puff adder.
Yep.
And we have footage of that. And, but we took that opportunity to, educate folks about that. So field surveys is definitely a big component of it. But also, as we mentioned earlier, education. So like what we talked about earlier with the Armed Forces Pest Management Board, they asked us to develop a picture guide on the dangerous snakes of Niger, Africa. So we did our research, we polled the community, we got pictures of all these venomous species, and we put it nicely together in a package that military personnel can use. And then, Rob, why don't you explain more about the venomous snake protocol that we developed?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Just to add to the survey in Chemi, Italy, on the island of Sicily, there were reports that there were venomous snakes there, but without boots on the ground, without our survey effort, we wouldn't have been able to confirm that. And we only got one venomous snake from that installation. Of course, we found one. There's probably more if there's one, but we were fortunate to confirm that, yeah, absolutely, those reports were correct, that there are venomous snakes there. And it's not just a myth that we're maybe hyping up the danger beyond what it really is, and freaking people out because of the snakes there. So we were able to confirm that, but also confirm there were a number of other snakes that were not venomous, so that every snake that they encounter is not, and we were able to teach that. Back to your question, Chris, it was several years ago that it was the Army that reached out to us, who had a venomous snake bite protocol for EURAFSWA, Europe and Southwest Asia, and they wanted us to review that, and they were doing an update on it. And since they knew that DoDPARC existed, they wanted to include us and our expertise. And so we were very fortunate to be able to reach out to, since the first letter in PARC stands for partnership, we had a partnership with some colleagues who knew the snakes there and also knew very well how to treat venomous snake bite. And so we were able to get them to spend some time and review this as partners with us out of Cornell and out of University of Texas, Austin. And we were able to significantly modify the venomous snakebite protocol to improve it for the troops, so that now they have a protocol they can reach back to, and from the troops on the ground who could be bitten, or anybody, personnel on the ground, all the way up to the medical professionals who would be treating them. We improved that protocol so that everybody was more aware of what the particular processes were. We were very grateful to do that, because if for everything that we've done and everything that we do for venomous snakes, if it saves one life, it was worth it, because it could absolutely jeopardize the life of someone. That someone could be very important as well. If we're going into the war theater and trying to take bad guys out, we don't want the environment to stop us from accomplishing the mission. And so we did improve that protocol, but there was also a limitation to it. So you need to understand that we had to put some sideboards on the update, because the venomous snakes in northern Africa there are a number of elapids, cobras and mambas, and we did not include that. We stuck to Europe and the vipers that are found there and over into Turkey and the Mediterranean, but we did not go into Africa, because that was a whole different set of venomous snakebite protocols that we would have had to include. So we specifically stuck to treating viper snake bites from viperids, but we did not do Africa. We can, but people need to understand that those are two very different types of snakes with very different type of medical treatment and protocols, and you can't combine the two. They're very different. So if someone gets bit in northern Africa, that's a very different recipe for success to try and save that person's life and treat them than if they're bitten by a viper in the northern Mediterranean or to the right over to the east.
I'm just blown away. Like, you guys are like Africa, Italy.
Oh yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, man,
We're blessed.
doing some really good stuff, you know. I always thought that, if possible, one of the most important things you can do is try and identify the snake that bit you.
Yeah.
Because without a proper identification, it's going to be hard to get you the proper anti-venom.
That's a tough call, and I don't know. I think if you put 10 doctors in a room, 10 herpetologists, you'd get 20 different answers on that one, because I'm of the mind that it's not worth wasting time. Number one is to get to a medical professional first. If you can opportunistically and fortunately and safely get a picture or identify that snake, that's great. But if you have to spend extra time to find, locate, or photograph or otherwise document that snake, that time is not worth it.
You never want to delay.
Yeah, but I also think that this education and outreach to the people that are in the field is what gets us a step closer, because what habitat you're in, the area of the country you're in, and if you're familiar with the species of snake that could have potentially, but you've reduced that guessing game down to something that's probably one or two species.
In the southwestern United States, where you have a very high diversity, like barium goldwater east, that could be important, because there are Mojave green rattlesnakes. They're not as their venom is not as toxic as to the north, but it's still really toxic. And the difference between that and a sidewinder, for instance, would be probably a very different treatment and a very different outcome if you're envenomated. If it's a western diamondback versus the Mojave green versus the sidewinder versus prairie rattlesnake or whatever else is over there, you could confuse it, and that could lead to a little bit of a different outcome with the doctor, but you're still probably going to largely be using the same type of anti-venom for all of those. Crowfab, I think it's the
Crowfab
one.
Yep, and that's also used for copperheads and cottonmouths as well.
Is that a synthetic anti-venom, or is it?
I believe it is. I think they don't make anti-venom anymore from injecting
milking
venom
snakes. Yeah.
Well, they don't. They used to get it by injecting large mammals like sheep with venom and then extracting the antibodies. But I think they do it. They do it synthetically now.
Sounds a little more humane.
It's really complex. Until recent decades, I say that now because we've been fortunate, some time on the clock has elapsed with robust scientific studies looking at venom of snakes and their evolution and their properties across all snakes. There have been a number of folks who've really invested in that, but we were kind of in the dark ages with that until recent years, where the medical industry was not advancing as much in understanding different snakes and venoms as they were some other afflictions to humankind. We really were behind. There were only limited number of antivenoms and limited quantities available, and so that market, if you will, and the science around it is improving, and that's really helpful. And what we're finding is it's incredibly diverse. What I mentioned earlier, where it changes across the life of an individual snake, and it can change across the range of a species, and it's really complex whenever you start looking at snake venoms and what their properties are, etc.
Any important takeaways that you want that maybe we haven't discussed?
It's kind of like any good research, any good science. Whenever we start to poke at a question that's given to us regarding venomous snakes,
More questions.
It asks more questions than we answer, and that's good, because then we really start to roll around in that topic and hopefully improve the knowledge base on it. It's not something I would dial down to job security,
Yeah.
But it's much more important than that. Again, it goes back to if we can save one life out of this with all the energy that we pour into what we do for venomous snakes, and it's totally worthwhile.
My take-home message would be, DoDPARC exists to support the military mission and to support civilian and military personnel. If you ever have a question about snakes, venomous snakes, reptiles, amphibians in general, Rob and Hi and all our DoD parks are here to help. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to us for any question you may have.
Absolutely.
That's great. I'm hungry, boys. Like, my stomach is like distracting. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode on venomous snakes. Hopefully it took your mind off the current corona pandemic for just a little bit. As always, you can find all the information discussed in the podcast at the DoD Park website. That's www.denix.osd.mil/DoDPark. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to Chris, Rob, or myself at dodparkpodcast@gmail.com. We'd welcome your suggestions and would love to hear from all of you regarding things you would like to hear about on the show. Special thanks again to Chris Petersen and Rob Lovich for their time and expertise, and to all of you guys listening. We're going to close out the show here with a bonus interview with Paul Block, aka Venomous Snakebite Survivor. And until next time, I'm Ian Trefry. Stay safe. Happy herping. So we are here with Paul Block, the only person I know that has ever been bitten by a venomous snake, and he is here to tell us his story. We discussed it earlier on the podcast, and he has been gracious enough to come in and tell us the account of his biting. And it's my understanding that he was super young.
That's right. Hello. Yes, I was 12 years old. I was always the kid, like most biologists probably were, who went out and collected critters, and I had a room full of aquariums with frogs and salamanders and lots of snakes. So me and my friends, we'd always go do what we called snake hunting. Not herping, but snake hunting. And so we go out in the woods, flip stuff, looking for them and all that. And one day, this was in Texas, one day we were down near some railroad tracks, and there were some old pieces of plywood laying around. And I flipped one over, and it was shaded from the sun, and there was a snake curled up under it. And one of the common snakes in the region is a yellow-bellied racer. Obviously, to catch a racer, you got to react quickly. So, and that's what I thought it was. It looked dark, unpatterned because of the shade from the board. So I reached for it, grabbed at it, and as soon as I reached for it, it struck at me and hit me in the thumb. And as soon as it happened, I knew what happened because it hit the sunlight, and I saw what it was. And so I was, upset, obviously, crying, scared, running from my friends. One of my buddies took off his shoelace from his shoe, tied it around my arm to act as a tourniquet. We were at least a mile or two away from my house. So we waved down some poor lady in a VW Beetle. I still remember it. It was yellow. And we hopped into her car. She drove to one of my buddy's house who was close by, and his mom was a nurse. He wasn't with us. So we went to the front door, and we're knocking on the door, and nobody answered. And turns out they were around the backs. But anyways, we went to their neighbors who we did not know, and pleaded for help. Instead of calling an ambulance, they drove me to my mom's house. I don't think they believed I was bit by a venomous snake. And so I got to my mom's house, my parents' house, and was just as we drove in the driveway, my mom was coming home from the grocery shopping or something and saw what happened. She threw me in her car. We drove to my doctor. He saw me and instantly told me to go to the emergency room.
That's a long day.
This probably all happened within about an hour. And so I was probably at the hospital maybe an hour, hour and a half. And of course, the first thing they want to do is verify what type of snake it was. So they were going to send out police officers to look for this snake. So I was a 12-year-old kid. They didn't believe me. They had the right anti-venom, you know. Mm-hmm. So finally my mom I said, look, he knows what he's talking about. Believe him. Give him the proper anti-venom for a copperhead. And so they listened. They did it. I spent 4 days in the hospital, a lot of pain, especially the first night. Didn't sleep much, but after that it got better. And I was a little bit of a celebrity at school after that. And, of course, my mom was super cool because she allowed me to continue to go snake hunting. And every other friend that I used to go snake hunting could no longer do it. So the moral of that story is have a cool mom.
Have a cool mom. So Chris was telling me yesterday that the inflammation in your thumb actually got so great that they had to.
Yeah, I have a long scar down my left hand thumb. They actually sliced to the bone to, I guess, relieve the pressure in the skin. I guess that was the thought behind it. I'm not so sure if that was worked or not, but anyways.
Wise.
It's a good
and scar. We had also talked about the do's and don'ts yesterday on bites, and one of the things that we talked about is do not tie a tourniquet.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
At the time, that's 40 plus
Don't
years
date
ago.
yourself.
Yeah, 40 plus years ago. So the thought process back then was different, I think. That used the old times when they'd have little suction kits and all that stuff. We didn't do that, but
and the pain
it was pretty solid. It was good for a 12-year-old. I mean,
I'm sure you probably bounced back from it a lot quicker than a grown man.
Yeah,
would.
I think so.
Yeah,
4 years in the hospital, 4 nights in the hospital.
4 nights in the hospital. 12 years old.
Yep.
Wow. You haven't been bitten one since,
look
right?
Before you grab. Yeah, no, I have definitely a different respect for snakes than I used to.
I'm sure. Well,
that's why I carry Chris with me.
Send him into the danger zone. You'll take the pictures. He can hold the snake.
Exactly.
And that's pretty much how it goes too in the field. So, all right, Paul. Well, thanks for coming in.
Right on.
And letting us know and kind of confirming the things we discussed earlier.
You sure did.
Thank you very much.